The angel number, you see right after someone breaks your trust. You still remember the exact second it happened, not the whole conversation. One sentence, one look, one message that rearranged everything you thought you understood about a person you trusted. In the hours after, while your mind kept replaying it, a number started showing up. On a clock, on a receipt, on a license plate you passed twice in one afternoon. You did not stop to ask what it meant. You were too busy trying to breathe. So here is the first thing you need to know. That number is not warning you that something is wrong. You already know something is wrong. It is confirming that what feels broken is not the end of the story. It is the start of a correction, a slow return to balance between what you believed and what was actually true. That is the surface answer. Underneath it are 3 deeper layers, and the third one explains why you still feel like you are waiting for something you cannot name, the moment something breaks. There is a specific kind of silence that follows betrayal. It is not peaceful. It is the silence of a nervous system trying to catch up with what the mind already knows. You go back over the timeline. You look for the moment you should have seen it. Not because you think it will change anything now, but because some part of you needs to locate the exact hinge where trust turned into something else. This is normal. It is also exhausting. Betrayal researchers describe this as a rupture in what they call assumptive trust, the quiet, background belief that lets you move through a relationship without constantly checking for danger. When that assumption breaks, your brain does not simply update one fact. It audits everything again. Every past conversation gets reopened for evidence. Every kind gesture gets re-examined for a hidden motive. That is why you feel exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. You are not grieving one event. You are auditing an entire relationship at once. And here is where most people get the timeline wrong. They assume the signs started appearing because something outside them wanted to warn them. But the pattern usually starts the moment your own awareness sharpens, the moment your nervous system switches from trusting mode into scanning mode. You did not attract this moment. You became capable of seeing it. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should, because it changes what the signs that follow are actually doing. They are not rescuing you from outside the situation. They are meeting you exactly where your perception already shifted, reinforcing a clarity that was forming inside you before you had language for it. Think about the last few days before this broke fully into the open. There was likely a flicker of doubt you talked yourself out of, a detail that did not add up, that you smoothed over because the alternative was too uncomfortable to sit with. That flicker was not paranoia. It was your own pattern recognition working correctly, ahead of your conscious mind's ability to accept what it was finding. This is the part almost nobody names directly, the part that changes how you read everything that comes after. The signs are not external proof. They are a mirror timed to your own becoming aware. So when the same number kept crossing your path in those first raw days, it was not arriving to inform you of the betrayal. You already knew. It was arriving to confirm that the clarity you were finally allowing yourself to feel was accurate, not exaggerated, not overreacting, not too much. That confirmation is the beginning of something you will need in what comes next, because knowing you were right is only step 1. What comes next is learning what to do with a trust that has been forced to reorganize itself from the ground up. Why 222 appears. The second trust collapses. The number is 222. If you have been seeing it since this happened, on clocks, in totals, in the strangest small repetitions, you are not imagining a pattern that is not there. You are noticing something real, and it deserves a real explanation instead of a vague one. In numerology, 222 is built from the number 2, repeated 3 times. 2 is the number most consistently linked to duality and partnership, to the relationship between two things that are supposed to move in balance. When 2922 appears right after a bond breaks, it is not celebrating the relationship. It is pointing directly at the imbalance the betrayal exposed, the moment one side of a partnership stopped holding its part of the agreement, while the other side kept holding theirs. That is the surface layer, and it matters. But there is a detail in this pattern that changes how you should be reading it, and most people miss it completely. 222 is not only about the bond between two people. It is about the relationship between your inner state and your outer reality, between what you privately sensed and what you were willing to admit out loud. Betrayal creates a very specific kind of imbalance inside a person, a gap between instinct and permission. You knew something before you let yourself know it. 222 is the number most associated with closing that exact gap. This is why the sightings tend to cluster hardest in the days right after the discovery, then taper as your instinct and your conscious understanding come back into alignment. It is not a coincidence of timing. It is the pattern doing precisely what its numerology describes, tracking the return of internal balance, rather than tracking the other person at all. There is also a psychological mechanism working alongside the symbolic one, and naming it will save you from a mistake many people make at this exact moment in their story. When trust breaks, the brain enters a state researchers call hypervigilant pattern seeking, an elevated tendency to notice and assign meaning to repetition, because repetition once signaled safety and now signals danger. You are, quite literally, wired right now to notice things you would normally scroll past. 222 is real. It is also arriving into a mind that has never been more primed to see it clearly. Both things are true at once. The number carries genuine symbolic weight, and your nervous system is currently built to catch it. That combination is not a contradiction. It is the exact condition under which meaning usually finds people, at the intersection of a real signal and a mind finally paying attention. What 222 is not telling you is to reconcile with the person who broke your trust. That is a separate question, and what comes next will address it directly. What it is telling you clearly and specifically is that the part of you responsible for sensing truth before you can prove it was never broken. It was simply outvoted for a while by your own hope. The difference between broken and over. There is a sentence people say to themselves in the first weeks after betrayal that sounds like clarity, but is actually confusion wearing clarity's clothes. That sentence is, "Everything is broken now. It feels true. It is rarely accurate." What actually breaks in a betrayal is narrower and more specific than it feels. It is the particular agreement you had with that particular person, the unspoken contract that said, "I will not be blindsided by you." That contract is broken, and it deserves to be treated as broken. But your capacity for trust as a whole did not shatter along with it. Your ability to eventually feel safe with someone new, your ability to read people accurately, none of that broke, even though it feels indistinguishable in the first raw weeks. This distinction is not comfort talk. It is a functional difference that determines how you rebuild. Psychologists who study betrayal trauma describe a pattern where the mind, in an effort to protect itself, generalizes the wound. One person broke a specific promise and the mind quietly rewrites the lesson as trust itself is dangerous. That rewrite feels protective in the moment. Over time, it becomes a cage because it applies a lesson learned from one person to every person who comes after. Here is the detail that earns its place, the one almost nobody tells you directly. The generalization is the actual injury you need to heal, more than the original betrayal itself. The betrayal was one event, done by one person, for their own reasons that ultimately had very little to do with your worth. The generalization is what you are doing to yourself afterward, and it is the part still within your control. Notice the language you have been using internally since this happened. If it sounds like people cannot be trusted, or I always pick the wrong ones, or I am done being vulnerable, listen closely. That language is doing more damage right now than the original event. The number 222 sitting quietly on your path is a countervailing signal against exactly this kind of overcorrection. 2 held in balance, repeated 3 times, is not a symbol of isolation. It is a symbol of relationship continuing to exist, even after one specific relationship failed to hold its shape. It is not telling you to trust the person who broke this. It is reminding you that trust itself as a capacity is still intact and still yours. The work ahead is simple to state and hard to practice. Separate the sentence, "This person broke my trust," from the sentence, "Trust is broken." The first one is fact. The second one is fear talking in the voice of wisdom, and it is the exact belief the rest of this video is going to help you dismantle. Why your mind keeps replaying the betrayal. At some point you have probably caught yourself mid-task doing something completely unrelated, suddenly back inside the exact conversation where you found out. Not remembering it, reliving it. The same words, the same physical sensation in your chest. This is not weakness, and it is not you failing to move on fast enough. It has a name, and understanding the name changes your relationship to the experience. Cognitive scientists call this intrusive rehearsal, a mechanism the brain uses when an event does not fit cleanly into your existing model of a person or a relationship. The mind keeps replaying the scene, searching for a version of events that makes sense because unresolved contradictions are treated by the brain as unfinished business, not as memories to be filed away. Here's the detail that reframes the entire experience. Your mind is not torturing you. It is trying to solve a puzzle it currently has too few pieces for. It replays the betrayal the way you would replay a magic trick you cannot figure out, searching each time for the piece that finally makes the picture hold together. The problem is not that the replaying happens. The problem is that most people try to force it to stop through willpower, which almost never works. Then they feel like they are failing twice, once at trusting the wrong person and again at healing correctly. There is a gentler approach, and it involves the number sitting quietly at the center of this video. 222 is associated with patience, specifically because balance is rarely instant. It arrives in increments, through repetition, the same way this number itself keeps repeating rather than appearing once. Healing from a rupture like this is not a single insight that ends the replaying. It is dozens of smaller moments of understanding, stacking until the picture finally holds. This is where most people misjudge their own progress, and it is worth naming plainly. They expect one clear realization to end the loop completely, and when it does not, they conclude they are stuck. In reality, the loop is already loosening in ways too gradual to notice day to day. The replays get shorter. The physical intensity fades first, then the frequency, then finally the vividness. You are not required to force closure on a timeline that does not belong to you. What you can do is stop treating each replay as evidence that you are failing to heal. Start treating it as your mind doing exactly what it is supposed to do with an unresolved pattern, slowly working it into something it can finally set down. The version of you standing on the other side of this is not the version who never replays it again. It is the version who can watch the replay happen and feel curiosity instead of collapse. The two versions of you standing in the wreckage. Betrayal produces a strange kind of doubling. There is the version of you who trusted, who gave the benefit of the doubt, who chose to believe the better explanation when a worse one was sitting right there. And there is the version of you standing now in the aftermath. Looking back at that first version with something close to embarrassment, you may have already caught yourself thinking, how did I not see it? How could I have been so trusting? That second voice can be harsh, and if you let it run unchecked, it starts punishing the very trait that made you someone worth being close to in the first place. This is worth slowing down on because it is one of the most common places people get stuck without realizing it. Carl Jung wrote about the tension between the persona we present and the shadow parts of ourselves we would rather not examine. What is less often discussed is how betrayal forces a similar confrontation between two internal versions of the self, the one who trusted and the one who now judges that trust as naive. Healing does not happen by choosing one version and discarding the other. It happens by letting them speak to each other. The trusting version of you was not foolish. She, or he, was operating on the evidence available at the time, evidence that included real affection, real history, real reasons to believe. Betrayal often works precisely because it exploits genuine connection, not because the person betrayed was careless. Deceit that succeeds usually succeeds against people who are paying close attention to the wrong things, not against people who are not paying attention at all. Here is the detail that most people never get told, and it will change how you talk to yourself for the rest of this healing process. The part of you capable of trusting deeply and the part of you capable of detecting danger accurately are not opposites competing for control. They are the same instinct, aimed at different moments in time. The trust that got broken and the clarity that is now protecting you come from the identical source inside you. This is where 222 becomes personally relevant rather than abstractly symbolic. Two held together, not two in conflict, not the trusting self against the wiser self, but both selves finally recognized as continuous, as one person growing more accurate over time rather than one person being replaced by another who knows better. You do not need to apologize to yourself for the version who trusted. That version is not gone, and she is not naive. She is simply better informed now, standing beside the person she always was, both of them finally on the same side. What 222 is actually asking you to hold. There is a reason 222 tends to feel different from other repeating numbers, calmer somehow, less urgent than the sharper energy of a number like 911 or the electric jolt of 1111. If you have noticed that difference without being able to name it, your instinct was accurate. Numerology consistently describes 222 as a number of patient holding rather than sudden revelation. It does not arrive to shock you awake. It arrives to steady you while something slower finishes happening beneath the surface, the way a held breath steadies a body before it exhales. What exactly are you being asked to hold? This is the question worth answering clearly, because vague reassurance is not useful to you right now. You are being asked to hold the discomfort of not yet knowing how this fully resolves. Betrayal creates an intense hunger for resolution, for a clean answer about what the relationship meant, whether it can be repaired, whether the other person will ever understand what they did. That hunger is completely understandable. It is also, right now, largely unsatisfiable, because resolution of that kind usually requires time you have not lived through yet. Here is the part that reframes everything. And it is the detail most people skip past because it is uncomfortable to sit with. Holding is not the same as waiting passively for someone else to fix things. Holding is an active discipline. It is the same discipline a musician uses to sustain a note without letting it waver, the same discipline required to keep a promise to yourself when nothing external confirms you are doing it right. 222. Repeating across your days is not asking you to be patient with the person who broke your trust. It may have nothing to do with them at all from this point forward. It is asking you to be patient with your own process. Resist the urge to force premature conclusions about your worth, your judgment, or your future capacity for connection, simply because the present moment feels unresolved. Consider what tends to happen when people skip this holding phase entirely. They rush to a verdict, either forgive too fast to outrun the pain, or condemn too completely to protect themselves from ever feeling this again. Both are attempts to escape the discomfort of holding an unresolved state. Both tend to require a second, harder reckoning later, when the rushed verdict does not actually hold up. The number is not asking you to stay stuck. It is asking you to let the resolution arrive at its own pace, built from evidence and time rather than assembled early out of urgency. That patience, uncomfortable as it is right now, is what turns this rupture into something you eventually understand rather than something you simply survived. Why you cannot trust the same way twice. At some point, probably soon, someone well-meaning will tell you that you just need to trust again, as if trust were a single switch you can flip back to its original position. It is not, and understanding why will save you from chasing an outcome that was never actually available to you. Trust before a significant betrayal and trust after one are not the same mechanism operating at different volumes. They are structurally different processes, and pretending otherwise is what leaves so many people feeling like they are failing at healing when they are actually succeeding at something more honest. Before betrayal, trust tends to be default. It runs quietly in the background, granted automatically until something disrupts it. This is efficient, and it is also exactly the vulnerability betrayal exploits, because default trust does not scrutinize, it simply assumes. After betrayal, trust becomes what researchers sometimes call earned or conditional trust, a version that is built incrementally, based on observed consistency over time rather than granted upfront based on affection or hope. This is not damage. This is the psychological equivalent of an immune system that has learned what a threat actually looks like. Here is the reframe most people never receive, and it changes how you should feel about this shift rather than mourning it. Conditional trust is not a lesser, more broken version of the trust you used to have. In many ways, it is a more mature form of trust, one that protects you without closing you off completely, one that still allows connection while requiring that connection prove itself. The discomfort you are likely feeling right now, the sense that you have lost your old, easy way of trusting people, is real, and it deserves acknowledgement rather than dismissal. But the old way was not inherently better. It simply had not yet been tested. This is where 222 offers something genuinely useful rather than merely comforting. The number 2, repeated, symbolizes a relationship built through steady, incremental correspondence rather than a single leap. That is precisely the shape conditional trust takes as it rebuilds, small deposit after small deposit, each one confirmed before the next one is offered. You are not broken for needing more time before you extend trust fully to someone new. You are not cynical for watching what people do more closely than you listen to what they say. That watching is not the absence of trust. It is trust in its more accurate, more mature form. It is the version capable of surviving contact with a person who does not deserve it because it never gives everything away at once. The quiet test. Nobody warns you about. There is a moment that arrives for almost everyone after a betrayal, usually weeks in, sometimes months, that nobody prepares you for. It does not feel like grief anymore. It feels like a test, and it is easy to fail without realizing a test was even happening. The moment looks like this. Someone new, or someone already in your life, does something small and slightly ambiguous, forgets to text back, cancels plans, gives an explanation that is technically plausible but not perfectly clean, and your entire nervous system responds as though the original betrayal is happening again, in real time, with this person who may have done nothing wrong at all. This is called a triggered response, and it is one of the least discussed parts of recovering from broken trust because it does not feel like a memory. It feels like present tense danger. Here is the mechanism behind it, stated plainly instead of vaguely. Your brain stored the betrayal alongside a specific set of sensory and emotional markers, a certain tone of voice, a particular kind of excuse, a familiar feeling of being slightly dismissed. When a new situation echoes even one of those markers, your nervous system does not pause to check whether the current person is the same person who hurt you. It reacts first and evaluates later. This is not paranoia, and it is not you sabotaging a good thing. It is a protective system doing exactly what it evolved to do, pattern matching for safety faster than conscious thought can intervene. The test is not whether you feel the trigger. You will, and that is not a failure. The test is what you do in the 60 seconds after you notice it happening. This is the part almost nobody names, and it is the difference between healing forward and quietly recreating the same dynamic with a different person. You have two options in that 60-second window. You can treat the trigger as proof, react as though the new situation confirms the old fear, and often push away someone who did not actually do anything to deserve it. Or you can name the trigger silently to yourself. This feeling is familiar, and it belongs partly to the past. Then give the current situation a genuine chance to show you what it actually is. Separate from what it merely resembles. 222 showing up during this exact phase makes symbolic sense once you understand what the number represents. It is the careful, repeated work of holding two things in balance at once, your past experience and your present reality, without collapsing one into the other. That balance is not natural yet. It is a skill, and like every skill, it gets easier with repetition, not with time alone. Why some bonds break to reveal what was never real. There is a painful question underneath most betrayals that people avoid asking directly, because the honest answer feels worse than the betrayal itself. The question is this: was any of it real? You are allowed to ask it. The answer, more often than the fear suggests, is more nuanced than either extreme you have probably imagined. It is rarely all of it was a lie, and rarely none of it was, just one terrible lapse. Relationships, even ones that end in betrayal, are rarely built entirely on deception from the first day. More often, something genuine existed early, and it eroded gradually, through avoidance, through unmet needs neither person voiced clearly, through small dishonesties that widened slowly into larger ones. The betrayal you discovered was usually not the beginning of the deception, It was the moment the deception finally became too large to hide. This distinction matters enormously for how you carry the memory of what came before. Here is the part worth sitting with, because it reframes the entire relationship, rather than only the ending. The affection, the history, the moments that genuinely felt safe, those can be real and still exist inside a relationship that later became unsustainable. Betrayal at the end does not automatically rewrite every earlier moment as fraudulent. It reveals that whatever was real was not in the end strong enough to hold the weight of honesty when honesty became difficult. That is a different, more survivable truth than the one your mind may be defaulting to. Not everything was a lie. Something real simply was not maintained. There is also a harder version of this question worth naming directly, without softening it. Sometimes when you look back with full clarity instead of through the fog of early affection, you can see it clearly. Certain things genuinely were performance from very early on, patterns of charm deployed strategically, consistency that only appeared when it was convenient. Both versions exist in the world, the relationship that eroded and the relationship that was constructed. Only you, looking honestly at the full pattern rather than one incident, can tell which one you were actually in. 222 here represents something specific, the number's traditional association with mirrors and reflection, the idea of two things facing each other and showing what is genuinely there. Use this period not to punish yourself for what you did not see, but to look back with the clarity you did not have access to at the time. What you find will not always be comfortable. It will, however, finally be accurate, and accuracy is what lets you close this part of the story instead of rewriting it endlessly in your head. The part of you that stayed loyal to yourself. In the middle of describing what someone else broke, it is easy to overlook something that has been quietly true this entire time. Somewhere underneath the pain, a part of you did not break at all. It kept functioning, kept showing up to work, kept feeding the people who depend on you, kept getting out of bed on mornings when that felt like the hardest task in the world. That part deserves to be named directly, because it rarely gets acknowledged in the middle of a story that is mostly about what was done to you. Call it the loyal core. It is the part of a person that keeps a private promise even when nobody is watching to confirm it. The promise to keep going, to keep being honest with yourself even when honesty is unflattering, to keep showing up as someone decent, even in the direct aftermath of someone else's indecency. This is worth pausing on. Betrayal has a specific way of making people feel like their own character is up for reconsideration too, as if the other person's dishonesty proves something about the world that includes you. It does not. Their choice was theirs. Your continued decency through the aftermath is a separate, entirely yours achievement. Here is the reframe that most people never get offered directly. The real measure of who you are is not whether you got betrayed, since that says far more about the other person's choices than it does about your judgment. The real measure is what you did in the days after. Whether you stayed someone you can respect, even while in pain. Whether you told the truth instead of a flattering version. Whether you resisted the urge to become cruel simply because someone was cruel to you. If you have managed even a fraction of that, and most people managing to watch a video like this one have, that is not a small thing. That is loyalty to yourself, demonstrated under the exact conditions that make loyalty hardest. When no one is applauding it, and the temptation to abandon your own standards is strongest. 222 carries a specific resonance here, the number of partnership extended inward as much as outward. The most important partnership disrupted by betrayal is not always the one with the person who broke it. It is the one between your present self and your own standards, your own sense of who you intend to be regardless of what is done to you. That partnership, the one between you and yourself, is the one this whole healing process is quietly rebuilding. And unlike the trust that was broken by someone else, this one has never actually left your hands. Why balance returns before certainty does. There is an expectation many people carry into healing that quietly sets them up for frustration. It is the belief that feeling better and knowing for certain how everything turns out are the same milestone, arriving together. They are not, and separating them will change how you interpret your own progress. Certainty in the aftermath of betrayal is often the last thing to return, if it returns fully at all. You may never know with total precision why the other person did what they did, whether it was one lapse or a pattern, whether their apology, if one came, was fully honest or partly self-serving. Waiting for that certainty before allowing yourself to feel steady again is waiting for a train that may not be coming on any schedule you can plan around. Balance, by contrast, tends to return earlier and more reliably than certainty ever does. Balance does not require knowing the full truth of what happened. It requires your nervous system settling back into a baseline where you can sleep, eat, focus, and feel present in your own life again, even while some questions remain permanently unanswered. This is the detail worth underlining clearly, because it is easy to miss while waiting for a resolution that keeps not arriving. You are allowed to feel calm again before you feel certain. In fact, for most people, calm has to arrive first, because a nervous system flooded with unresolved threat cannot think clearly enough to arrive at any certainty at all. Balance is not the reward for finally understanding everything. Balance is often the precondition that makes clearer understanding possible in the first place. This is precisely why 222 tends to arrive earlier in a person's timeline than resolution does. Its return often feels almost premature, as though the signs are rushing ahead of where the person feels they should be emotionally. They are not rushing ahead. They are arriving in the correct order, balance first, clarity following behind it at its own pace. If you have noticed moments recently where you felt unexpectedly okay, a stretch of an afternoon where you were not thinking about this at all, do not distrust it. That feeling is not evidence you are taking this too lightly. That feeling is the balance this number has been pointing toward the entire time, arriving exactly on schedule, even though the full picture has not resolved yet and may never resolve completely. Let the calm arrive before the answers do. The answers, to whatever extent they come at all, will find you far more capable of receiving them once you are no longer waiting for them to arrive first. The signs that confirm you are not imagining this. At some point, someone in your life, maybe well-meaning, maybe not, will suggest that you are reading too much into a repeating number, that it is a coincidence and nothing more. You do not need to argue with them. But you deserve, for your own clarity, to understand why the pattern you have been noticing holds up to real scrutiny rather than dismissing your own experience out of politeness. Coincidence, statistically, is real, and it would be dishonest to pretend every repeated number carries meaning. But there is a difference between a number appearing once, which genuinely can be chance, and a number appearing repeatedly across different contexts, concentrated specifically around a period of significant emotional upheaval. That second pattern is the one worth paying attention to, and it is the one most people describing this experience are actually reporting. Carl Jung called this kind of meaningful alignment synchronicity, a coincidence of inner and outer events that carries psychological significance precisely because of its timing, not because it violates any law of physics. He was careful to distinguish it from magical thinking. Synchronicity does not claim the number caused anything. It claims that the timing of noticing it, alongside a major inner shift, is itself meaningful information about where your psyche currently is. Here is the practical version of that idea, stated without the academic language. When 222 shows up repeatedly while you are processing broken trust, your mind is drawing your attention to the exact theme your healing currently requires. Balance, partnership. The relationship between two things. Whether you consider that arrangement mystical or purely psychological, the outcome is identical either way. The pattern is functioning as a mirror, reflecting back the theme your inner world is actively working through. This is worth naming plainly, because it is the detail that finally answers the doubt most people carry quietly. You are not manufacturing significance out of nothing. You are noticing a real correlation between an external pattern and an internal process at a moment when your attention is unusually well tuned to exactly this kind of correlation. Trust what you have been noticing, not blindly and not as a replacement for the practical work this healing still requires, but as one accurate piece of evidence among several that you are not simply spiraling. You are paying attention at a moment in your life when paying attention matters more than usual. The pattern you are seeing is a reasonably reliable signal that your inner process and the signs around you are, for now, speaking the same language. what rebuilding actually requires. At some point, the raw phase of this experience starts to give way to a quieter, more practical question. Not what happened, and not why, but what now? What does rebuilding an ability to trust actually look like in practice, once the initial shock has settled? Most advice on this topic stays frustratingly vague. Suggestions like, give it time, or trust your gut, that sound true without offering anything usable. This part is going to be more specific than that. Rebuilding trust, whether in a specific relationship or in your general capacity to connect with new people, tends to require 3 concrete elements. Skipping any one of them tends to stall the entire process. The first is evidence over time, not promises. Words are cheap after a betrayal, and both you and anyone you are rebuilding trust with know it. What actually recalibrates a nervous system that has learned caution is consistent, observed behavior repeated across enough occasions that it stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a pattern. This cannot be rushed by wanting it to be true faster. The second is your own willingness to notice good evidence when it appears, not just bad evidence. A nervous system in protective mode becomes excellent at spotting red flags and surprisingly poor at registering green ones, because vigilance narrows attention toward threat by design. Part of rebuilding is deliberately practicing the harder skill, letting genuinely reassuring moments actually register instead of being filtered out by a mind still braced for disappointment. The third element is the one most often skipped entirely, and it is the one this whole video has been building toward. Rebuilding requires trusting your own judgment again, not just trusting other people. Betrayal does not only damage your view of the person who hurt you, it damages your confidence in your own ability to read situations accurately. And that damage, left unaddressed, quietly sabotages every future relationship, regardless of how trustworthy the other person actually is. Here is the detail that ties all 3 together, and it is worth holding on to after this video ends. You do not rebuild trust by deciding in advance to believe someone fully again. You rebuild it by rebuilding your own instrument for reading people accurately, then trusting that instrument, evidence by evidence. The same slow, repeated, balanced process the number 222 has been describing this entire time. That instrument was not destroyed by what happened to you. It was recalibrated, and a recalibrated instrument, once you trust it again, tends to be more accurate than the one you had before any of this started. Why 222 follows you until you trust yourself again. There is a pattern reported so consistently by people who have lived through this exact experience that it is worth naming as its own phenomenon. The sightings of 222 do not stop the day the pain stops. They tend to continue, sometimes for months, right up until one specific internal shift finally happens, and that shift is rarely reconciliation with the person who broke the trust. It is something quieter and more personal than that. The sightings tend to fade once you stop needing outside confirmation that your judgment is sound. This is worth sitting with directly, because it reframes the entire purpose of everything you have been noticing. If the number were simply marking the presence of betrayal, it would fade the moment the immediate crisis passed. It does not fade then. It persists through the whole slow middle section, the triggered moments, the replaying, the cautious rebuilding, and only recedes once something specific settles inside you. What settles is this. You stop asking, silently or out loud, was I foolish to trust them? You start simply knowing that you were not, that you acted on real evidence at the time, that the failure belonged to someone else's choices and not to your judgment. Once that knowing becomes stable rather than something you have to keep proving to yourself, the external confirmation stops being necessary, and the pattern of sightings tends to naturally quiet down. This is the deepest layer this video has been building toward, the third layer promised at the very beginning. The first layer was recognition, the second was symbolic meaning, and this third layer is the actual mechanism underneath both of them. 222 was never really about the person who hurt you. It was accompanying you specifically until your trust in your own perception recovered, at which point its job, functionally, is finished. If you are still seeing it regularly, that is simply useful information, not something to worry about. It means that quiet internal reconciliation with your own judgment has not fully completed yet. That is completely normal this early, in a process that takes time to finish honestly, rather than to rush. And if the sightings have already started to slow down, notice what that likely means about where you actually are, even if it does not feel that way yet. It likely means the part of you capable of trusting your own read on people is already further along in recovering than your conscious mind has registered. That was the part this ordeal put under the most pressure. The new foundation you are standing on. Picture the version of you from before this happened, the one who trusted easily, who assumed good faith by default, who had not yet been tested this specific way. That version is not who you are anymore, and by now, that should not feel like a loss. You are standing on a different foundation now, one built from something more durable than assumption. Assumption is easy to shake, because it was never tested to begin with. What you are building instead is trust that has already met evidence, already survived contact with disappointment, already proven it can hold weight under real pressure, rather than only in theory. That is not a smaller kind of trust than what you had before. It is a stronger one quietly, even though it took a painful path to arrive. Think back across everything this has actually shown you. It showed you that your instincts were sound before you had proof, that the flicker of doubt you felt early on was accurate pattern recognition, not paranoia. It showed you that the part of you capable of deep trust and the part of you capable of clear sight are the same instinct, not enemies. It showed you that some things eroded slowly rather than being fake from the start, and that distinction matters for how you remember what came before. Most importantly, it showed you something about your own character under pressure. You stayed loyal to your own standards even while someone else abandoned theirs. You kept choosing honesty and decency in the exact conditions that make both hardest to maintain. 222 will likely keep appearing for a while longer, and each time it does, let it mean this instead of alarm. Balance is returning. Not the old balance, the one built on assumption, a new one, built on your own tested, proven capacity to read situations honestly and choose connection anyway, carefully, deliberately, on your own terms. You are not the person this happened to anymore. You are the person who came through it still capable of trust, still capable of warmth. But now you carry something the earlier version of you did not have, the hard-won knowledge that your own perception can be trusted, even when the person in front of you could not be. That knowledge does not leave. Whatever comes next, whoever comes next, you are meeting them from solid ground. Not from the fragile hope you once mistook for foundation, but from something you built yourself, one balanced, deliberate step at a time. That ground will hold. It already has.